A millionaire cheated on his girlfriend with a single mother, and 6 months later, she shows up pregnant serving him coffee. But the woman who helped him build his empire is no longer the same. What happens at that celebration of the millionaire's new life will surprise you. Follow this and many other twists. From his corner office overlooking the Boston skyline, Ethan Blackwood could see the harbor, where his great-grandfather had first established Blackwood Environmental Solutions nearly a century ago. The morning sun glinted off the water, casting her golden glow across the city that had been his family's domain for generations. At 32, Ethan carried the weight of legacy on his shoulders, a burden he'd been groomed to bear since childhood. The board is waiting. Mr. Blackwood, his assistant reminded him from the doorway. Ethan straightened his tie, a gesture that had become almost ritualistic before important meetings. "Thank you, Jennifer. I'll be right there." As he gathered his documents, his phone buzzed with a message from Olivia Reed. "Good luck today. Remember why we started this journey." A smile crossed his face. Olivia had been by his side for the past 5 years, his girlfriend, his confidant, and more importantly, the visionary behind Blackwood's most innovative sustainability projects. While Ethan had the name and the business acumen, Olivia possessed the passion and creativity that had revitalized the company's mission. Together, they had plans to transform Blackwood from a traditional environmental consulting firm into a global leader in sustainable development. The boardroom fell silent as Ethan entered. Seated around the polished mahogany table were the 12 men and women who controlled the direction of Blackwood Environmental Solutions. At the far end sat Victor Harrison, CEO of Harrison Global Investments and a key potential investor in Blackwood's expansion plans. "Gentlemen, ladies," Ethan nodded, taking his place at the head of the table. "Thank you for joining us this morning." The presentation went smoothly. Ethan had always been good at this part. He outlined their vision for Blackwood's future: sustainable urban development projects across major American cities, innovative waste management solutions, and renewable energy initiatives. These were Olivia's ideas brought to life through his voice. "Impressive," Victor Harrison commented when Ethan finished, "but ambitious, very ambitious." "The world needs ambition, Mr. Harrison," Ethan replied with the confidence that came from his family name. "Blackwood has always been at the forefront of environmental solutions. We're simply taking the next logical step." Victor's eyes narrowed slightly. "And the capital required for this logical step?" $300 million for the initial phase. The projections show a return within 5 years. A murmur rippled through the room. It was a substantial ask even for Blackwood. "I'll be frank, Ethan," Victor said, leaning forward. "Harrison Global is prepared to back your vision, but we need assurances that Blackwood's leadership is stable and forward-thinking." Ethan frowned. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean by stable, Mr. Harrison." Victor exchanged glances with Walter Blackwood, Ethan's father and chairman of the board. Walter cleared his throat, a signal Ethan had learned to recognize as a prelude to something uncomfortable. "What Victor means, son, is that certain aspects of your personal life might not align with the image we want to project to our investors." Walter's voice was measured, practiced. "The board and I have discussed this at length. We believe it would be beneficial for you to consider a more strategic partnership." "Strategic partnership," Ethan repeated, though he already understood what his father meant. "Rebecca Harrison," Victor said bluntly, naming his own daughter. "She's completed her MBA at Harvard, worked for 3 years at Goldman Sachs, and understands the financial landscape better than most veterans in the industry. Our union between Blackwood and Harrison would send a powerful message to the market." The room fell silent as Ethan processed what was being proposed. A business marriage, not an uncommon practice among elite circles, but something he had never considered for himself. His thoughts immediately went to Olivia, to their shared apartment in Cambridge, to the life they had planned together. "I appreciate the suggestion," Ethan said carefully, "but my personal life isn't relevant to our business discussions." Walter's expression hardened. "It's entirely relevant, Ethan. This isn't just about capital, it's about alliances, about securing Blackwood's position for generations to come. Rebecca brings connections we need, a pedigree that complements our own. And Olivia brings innovation, passion, expertise in sustainability. Olivia Reed is a talented consultant, Victor interrupted, but she doesn't bring the strategic advantages that my daughter does. This isn't personal, Ethan. It's business. The E. Words hung in the air like a verdict. Ethan looked around the table, seeing the resolution in the board members' eyes. The decision had already been made. This meeting was merely a formality to inform him. Later that evening, Ethan sat alone in his office, the city lights stretched out before him like stars fallen to earth. His phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from Olivia, wondering why he'd cancelled their dinner plans. He couldn't bring himself to read them, let alone respond. How could he explain that in one afternoon, their future together had been dismantled by a boardroom of people who valued strategic alliances over love? The door opened, and his father entered without knocking, a privilege Walter had always exercised. "You've been avoiding my calls," Walter said, closing the door behind him. "I needed time to think," Ethan replied. Walter sighed and took a seat across from his son. "Ethan, I know this isn't easy, but sometimes leadership requires difficult choices. You're asking me to end my relationship with Olivia for a business deal." "I'm asking you to secure the future of Blackwood," Walter corrected. "The Harrison partnership brings more than just money. It brings stability, international connections, political influence. And what about the vision Olivia and I have been building? The sustainable projects, the community initiatives? They can continue," Walter assured him. "Olivia is valuable to the company. She can remain part of the team." Ethan laughed bitterly. "You expect her to stay after I marry someone else? To work alongside us like nothing happened?" Walter's expression was unreadable. "That's her choice to make. But your choice needs to be clear by morning. The board is prepared to vote on the Harrison proposal tomorrow. They need to know if you're with us." After his father left, Ethan stood by the window for hours watching the city below. Boston had been the Blackwood domain for generations. Every major building, every development project, every environmental initiative bore their influence in some way. Could he really risk losing all of that for love? By morning, Ethan had made his decision. He drafted a short email to the board expressing his support for the Harrison partnership. Then, without allowing himself to reconsider, he sent a text message to his assistant. "Jennifer, please inform Ms. Reed that her consulting contract will be moved to our Seattle office, effective immediately. Arrange for the transition team to handle the projects she's currently managing here." No personal message, no explanation, no goodbye, just a clean professional break. He told himself it was kinder this way, a quick severance rather than a painful discussion. And perhaps in some corner of his mind, he knew that if he faced Olivia, if he looked into her eyes and tried to explain, he might not have the strength to go through with it. That afternoon, Ethan met Rebecca Harrison for lunch at an exclusive restaurant overlooking the harbor. She was striking, tall, poised, with sharp intelligence in her dark eyes. Their conversation flowed easily, centered around business strategies and market opportunities. Not once did they speak of love or personal connection. It was a negotiation, clear and simple. 2 weeks later, their engagement was announced at a gala event hosted by the Harrison family. The business pages lauded it as the merger of two powerful dynasties. Ethan smiled for the cameras, shook hands with investors, and spoke confidently about the future of Blackwood Harrison Enterprises. He did not allow himself to wonder where Olivia was or how she had received the news. He had made his choice, the pragmatic choice, the business choice. The path forward was clear even if something indefinable had been left behind. 18 months had passed since Ethan's decision, and the results spoke for themselves. The merger between Blackwood Environmental Solutions and Harrison Global Investments had created a corporate powerhouse that dominated the sustainable development sector. Blackwood Harrison Enterprises now had offices in 12 major cities across the United States and was expanding internationally with projects underway in London, Singapore, and Dubai. The New York Times had recently featured Ethan in their 40 Under 40 list, praising his bold vision for environmentally responsible urban development. Forbes had followed with a cover story on the power couple transforming America's approach to sustainability. On paper, Ethan Blackwood had achieved everything he had ever worked for. Today marked the culmination of his personal transformation as well. The Blackwood-Harrison wedding was taking place at the historic Rosecliff Mansion in Newport, Rhode Island, a celebration that had been meticulously planned over the past year to showcase the union of two of America's most influential families. 5 minutes, Mr. Blackwood, the wedding coordinator informed him as she adjusted his boutonniere. Ethan nodded, studying his reflection in the full-length mirror. The custom Tom Ford tuxedo fit perfectly, as did the role he had stepped into. He and Rebecca had developed a partnership that was efficient and productive. If it lacked the warmth and spontaneity he had known with Olivia, it compensated with ambition and purpose. They were building something significant together, that was enough. Nervous? Asked James, his best man and childhood friend. Just focused, Ethan replied with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The ceremony was flawless, orchestrated to project the perfect image to the 400 guests in attendance. Business. Leaders, politicians, celebrities, and socialites watched as Ethan and Rebecca exchanged vows beneath an archway of white orchids, with the Atlantic Ocean as their backdrop. Photographers from Vogue and Vanity Fair captured every moment for features that would run in their next issues. At the reception, Ethan moved through the crowd with practiced ease, accepting congratulations and discussing business opportunities with the same polished charm. Rebecca was equally adept, a perfect counterpart in their carefully choreographed performance. "You've done well for yourself," commented Senator Mitchell, an old family friend, as they stood by the bar. "Rebecca is a remarkable woman, smart, match." "Thank you, Senator," Ethan replied, his eyes scanning the ballroom. "We're excited about the future. I hear your sustainability initiative in Detroit is already exceeding expectations. The urban farming project?" Ethan nodded, momentarily distracted. "Yes, it's been quite successful. We've transformed over 200 acres of abandoned industrial space into productive farmland. The community impact has been significant." It was one of the projects Olivia had conceptualized before their separation, her vision brought to life under the Blackwood-Harrison banner. Ethan had ensured the implementation stayed true to her original plans, though he'd never acknowledged her contribution publicly. "Remarkable what proper funding and vision can accomplish," the senator continued. "You should consider presenting the model at the next climate summit. The administration would be very interested." "I'll have my team send over the data," Ethan said, accepting a fresh glass of champagne from a passing server. As he raised the glass to his lips, his gaze fell on the young woman holding the tray. For a moment, the world around him seemed to freeze. Though her hair was shorter now, styled differently, and her face thinner than he remembered, there was no mistaking those eyes, the same eyes that had once looked at him with such trust and love. It, Olivia. She held his gaze for just a second before moving on to the next group of guests, her professional smile never faltering. But in that brief moment of recognition, Ethan saw something in her expression that sent a chill through him, a composed dignity that hadn't been there before, hardened by experience. And then he noticed what the elegant black server's uniform had partially concealed. She was pregnant, the gentle curve of her belly visible as she turned to serve another guest. The champagne glass nearly slipped from his fingers. "Excuse me, Senator," he mumbled, stepping away without waiting for a response. For the next hour, Ethan moved through his own wedding reception in a daze, performing the expected duties, the first dance, the toasts, the cake cutting, while his mind raced. Why was Olivia here, working as a server at his wedding? What had happened in the 18 months since he'd last seen her? And the pregnancy? Who was the father? He caught glimpses of her throughout the evening, efficiently, moving through the crowd, invisible to the guests in the way that service staff often are. But to Ethan, she was the only person in the room he could truly see. When Rebecca pulled him aside between dances, her smile was fixed, but her eyes were sharp. "You seem distracted. Is something wrong?" "Just overwhelmed," he lied smoothly. "It's been a long day." She studied him for a moment before nodding. "Well, pull it together. The chambers are waiting to discuss their investment in the Singapore project, and they won't be in town again until December. This was their rhythm, Rebecca. Managing the connections, Ethan providing the vision. It worked, it was profitable. It was exactly what he had chosen. Later, as the evening wound down and guests began departing, Ethan found himself alone on the terrace overlooking the ocean. The late September air carried a hint of autumn's chill, a welcome relief after the stuffiness of the ballroom. The party's moving inside for the final toast, came a voice from behind him. Rebecca stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the warm light from within. "I'll be right there," he promised. She hesitated, then stepped forward to join him at the railing. "Something's been bothering you all evening. I'd rather know what it is now than have it become an issue later." Ethan considered deflecting, but thought better of it. Their relationship was built on pragmatism, not passion. Honesty served them better than sentiment. "One of the servers," he said finally. "It's Olivia." Rebecca's expression didn't change, but he felt her stiffen beside him. "Olivia Reed, your former girlfriend?" "Yes." "Working as a server at our wedding." Her tone was flat, evaluating the information rather than reacting to it. "That's unexpected. Did you know she would be here?" "Of course not," Ethan replied, perhaps too quickly. "I haven't had any contact with her since the separation." Rebecca was silent for a moment, her analytical mind working through the implications. "I'm assuming you've noticed her condition as well." The clinical way she referred to Olivia's pregnancy made Ethan flinch. "Yes." "Do you need to be concerned about the timing?" The question hit him like a physical blow. He hadn't even considered that possibility. "No," he said firmly. "It's been 18 months. The timing doesn't align." Rebecca nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Then I suggest we finish our obligations for the evening and deal with this coincidence tomorrow, if necessary. Tonight is about Blackwood Harrison, not past relationships." She was right, of course. She usually was when it came to maintaining focus on their goals. Ethan offered his arm, and together they returned to the ballroom for the final toast of the evening. But even as he raised his glass to their future, Ethan couldn't shake the image of Olivia moving silently through the crowd, carrying a tray of drinks in one hand and a new life beneath her heart. Something fundamental had shifted in his carefully constructed world, and he knew with absolute certainty that he wouldn't be able to ignore it. 3 days later, back in Boston after a brief honeymoon in the Maldives, Ethan sat in his home office staring at his computer screen. The search bar blinked at him accusingly as he debated the line he was about to cross. Finally, with a decisive click, he typed, "Olivia Reed, Boston." The results were sparse: a LinkedIn profile that hadn't been updated in over a year, a few academic publications from her time at MIT, and an old newspaper article about a community garden project she had spearheaded in Cambridge. Nothing recent, nothing that explained her current circumstances. He tried variations: Olivia Reed, environmental consultant; Olivia Reed, sustainability projects; Olivia Reed, New England. Each search yielded similarly outdated information. It was as if she had disappeared from professional existence around the time of their separation. Frustrated, Ethan leaned back in his chair. There had to be a way to find out what had happened. He considered asking Jennifer, his assistant, who had handled the paperwork for Olivia's transfer to Seattle, but quickly dismissed the idea. Office gossip traveled fast, and he couldn't risk Rebecca hearing about his inquiries. The solution came to him suddenly. Timothy Walsh, the head of human resources. Tim had been with Blackwood for decades and was one of the few executives who had remained neutral during the merger negotiations. More importantly, he owed Ethan a favor after Ethan had supported his daughter's application to an exclusive private school where the Blackwoods had influence. A discreet call later that afternoon yielded the information Ethan sought. According to Tim, Olivia had never reported to the Seattle office. She had resigned from Blackwood Environmental Solutions the day after receiving her transfer notice, citing personal reasons in her hastily submitted letter. There had been no exit interview, no formal handover of her projects. She had simply disappeared. The knowledge left Ethan more unsettled than before. What had happened to drive Olivia, passionate, dedicated Olivia, from the career she had worked so hard to build, and how had she ended up serving drinks at his wedding? The downtown Boston Public Library was the last place anyone would expect to find Ethan Blackwood on a Tuesday afternoon. He had told his office he was meeting with potential investors, a half-truth that gave him the privacy he needed. Sitting at a computer terminal far from the entrance, he continued the search he had begun in his home office. This time he expanded his parameters beyond professional listings. Social media yielded nothing. Olivia had always been private, that away. But local news archives provided a fragment. 8 months ago, the Cambridge Chronicle had run a small piece about the closure of Greenspace Innovations, a sustainability startup founded by Olivia Reed and Marcus Chen. The article cited financial challenges and lack of investor support as reasons for the company's dissolution. Ethan frowned at the screen. Greenspace Innovations had been Olivia's dream, a company dedicated to creating affordable sustainability solutions for urban communities. She had talked about it for years, planning to launch it once she had gained enough experience and connections through her work at Blackwood. Apparently, she had attempted to make that dream a reality after leaving the company. Further searching revealed a small legal notice in the public records. Marcus Chen, aged 34, had passed away 4 months ago after a brief illness. The notice mentioned he was survived by friends and loved ones, with no specific names listed. Ethan sat back, piecing together the fragments. Olivia had left Blackwood, started her own company with a partner named Marcus Chen, faced financial difficulties, and then lost her partner. Somewhere in that timeline, she had also become pregnant. The picture was becoming clearer, but critical pieces were still missing. After a moment's hesitation, Ethan took out his phone and called Peter Morgan, a private investigator the company occasionally used for background checks on potential business partners. The conversation was brief and professional. Ethan requested a discreet inquiry into Olivia Reed's current situation, emphasizing that the information was for personal reasons and should be handled with sensitivity. 3 days later, Peter's report arrived in a plain manila envelope at Ethan's private post office box. The contents painted a story far more devastating than Ethan had imagined. After leaving Blackwood, Olivia had indeed formed Greenspace Innovations with Marcus Chen, a former colleague from MIT. The company had shown early promise, securing small contracts for community garden designs and rainwater collection systems. But without the Blackwood name behind her, Olivia struggled to attract significant investment. Several potential backers had pulled out at the last minute. Companies that Ethan noted with a growing sense of unease had strong ties to either Blackwood or Harrison. Then, 7 months ago, Olivia's father had suffered a severe stroke. With minimal health insurance and mounting medical bills, Olivia had been forced to liquidate her assets, including her stake in Greenspace. The company had collapsed shortly thereafter. Meanwhile, her relationship with Marcus had evolved from professional to personal. They had moved in together, and according to interviews with neighbors, had been planning to marry before Marcus was diagnosed with an aggressive form of leukemia. The treatments had drained what little savings remained. Marcus had passed away just 3 months before Ethan's wedding, leaving Olivia pregnant, grieving, and financially devastated. The final pages of the report detailed Olivia's current situation. She lived in a small apartment in Dorchester, worked 3 jobs, including for the catering company that had serviced Ethan's wedding, and was 5 months pregnant. Her father had survived the stroke, but required ongoing care which consumed most of her income. Ethan closed the report, a cold weight settling in his chest. The woman who had once challenged CEOs with her bold sustainability proposals, who had presented at international conferences and been courted by top universities for guest lectures, was now serving drinks at events she should have been attending as a guest. And he couldn't escape the suspicion that his own actions, or rather, the actions of the Blackwood-Harrison alliance, had contributed to her downfall. Had the potential investors pulled out because they feared offending the newly merged corporation? Had doors been deliberately closed to ensure Olivia didn't become a competitor? The thought sickened him. He had justified his choice as a business decision convinced himself that personal feelings had no place in the corporate world. But now, faced with the consequences of that decision, the line between personal and professional blurred beyond recognition. "You're distracted again," Rebecca observed that evening as they prepared for a charity gala. She adjusted his bow tie with practiced efficiency. "The Singapore investors or something else?" Ethan met her gaze in the mirror. In the 18 months of their relationship, they had developed a certain understanding. Rebecca didn't expect romantic declarations or emotional intimacy, but she did demand honesty in matters that might affect their shared objectives. "I found out what happened to Olivia," he admitted. Rebecca's hands stilled for a moment before resuming their task. "I assume it's not good news, given your mood." Ethan gave her the condensed version, omitting details that felt too personal to share. When he finished, Rebecca moved to her vanity to put on her earrings, her expression thoughtful. "It's unfortunate," she said finally. "She was talented." "Unfortunate," Ethan repeated, a hint of anger creeping into his voice. "Rebecca, she's working 3 jobs while pregnant, because every door in her industry closed after she left. Blackwood, and you think we're responsible? I think our merger created a situation where anyone associated with either of us has extraordinary influence. Influence that could easily discourage potential investors from backing a former employee's competing venture." Rebecca turned to face him fully. "Ethan, we never instructed anyone to sabotage her company. If investors chose not to back her venture, that was their decision based on business factors. But would they have made the same decision if she hadn't been my ex-girlfriend? If she hadn't left Blackwood under those circumstances?" "That's speculation," Rebecca replied, her tone cooling. "And frankly, beyond the scope of our concern. We have a responsibility to our shareholders and employees, not to every entrepreneur who fails to secure funding." Her pragmatism, usually a quality Ethan admired, now struck him as callous. But before he could respond, Rebecca continued, her voice softening slightly. "However, if you feel some obligation to help, there are appropriate channels. We could create a position for her at the foundation, something that would provide stability without disrupting our corporate structure." Ethan stared at her, caught off guard by the suggestion. "You'd be willing to hire her?" "If she's as talented as you've always claimed, it would be a strategic acquisition of skill. Her experience with grassroots sustainability projects could benefit our community outreach initiatives." Rebecca fastened a diamond bracelet around her wrist. "Besides, it would resolve this distraction you're experiencing." There was calculation in her offer, but also a genuine attempt to find a solution. This was Rebecca's way, identifying problems and addressing them efficiently without dwelling on emotional complications. "I'll think about it," Ethan said, uncertain how Olivia would react to such an offer, or if he had any right to make it after what had happened. The next morning, Ethan found himself parked outside a modest apartment building in Dorchester. He had left home early, telling Rebecca he had a breakfast meeting. Now, sitting in his car, he questioned his own judgment. What exactly did he hope to accomplish by coming here? As he debated whether to leave, he spotted her emerging from the building. Olivia was dressed simply in jeans and a sweater that couldn't quite conceal her growing pregnancy. She carried a canvas tote bag and walked with the same purposeful stride he remembered, though there was a weariness to her movements that hadn't been there before. Without giving himself time to reconsider, Ethan got out of the car and called her name. Olivia stopped, her body tensing visibly before she turned to face him. Up close, the changes in her were more apparent, the shadows under her eyes, the thinness of her face contrasting with her pregnant form, the wariness in her expression. "What are you doing here, Ethan?" Her voice was steady, betraying neither surprise nor pleasure at his appearance. "I needed to talk to you," he said, suddenly aware of how inadequate the words sounded. "About what happened, about everything." "It's been 18 months, she replied. "A bit late for explanations, don't you think?" "I know, I just—" He faltered, the carefully prepared speech dissolving in the face of her direct gaze. "I saw you at the wedding. Yes, serving champagne to your guests. Life takes unexpected turns, and there was no self-pity in her tone, just a factual acknowledgement. Olivia, I'm sorry about Marcus, about your father, about green space. Her eyes narrowed. You've been investigating me? I needed to understand what happened. Why, to ease your conscience? She shook her head. I have a bus to catch, Ethan. Some of us have jobs that don't come with private drivers. As she turned to leave, Ethan stepped forward. Let me help. You, please. Rebecca and I could offer you a position at the foundation, something that would use your expertise, provide stability. Olivia's laugh cut him off, a sharp, humorless sound. You want to hire me? As what, your charity case? The discarded girlfriend you can feel better about by offering a job? It's not like that, Ethan protested. Your talent is being wasted. The work you were doing, the vision you had, it matters. It could still matter. Something flickered in her eyes, a momentary softening, perhaps recognition of the shared passion they once had, but it was quickly replaced by resolve. I appreciate the offer, but no, she said firmly. I don't need your help or your wife's pity. I'm rebuilding my life on my own terms. At least let me help with medical expenses for the baby. No, Olivia said, her hand moving protectively to her belly. This child will never be indebted to the Blackwood family. Never. The finality in her voice struck Ethan like a physical blow. He watched helplessly as she walked, away, disappearing around the corner toward the bus stop. The encounter had lasted less than 5 minutes, but it had shattered any illusion that he could easily make amends for the past. Back in his car, Ethan sat with his hands gripping the steering wheel, his mind racing. Olivia's rejection of his offer wasn't surprising, but her vehemence about keeping her child separate from the Blackwood influence disturbed him deeply. There was something more there, something beyond the hurt of their separation or the struggles she had faced since. A notification on his phone interrupted his thoughts. Rebecca had texted, "How was your meeting? The Singapore contracts arrived this morning, need your signature by noon." Ethan stared at the message, the parallel realities of his life in stark contrast. In one world, he was signing multi-million-dollar contracts and shaping the future of international sustainable development. In the other, he was sitting in his car in Dorchester, having failed to help the woman who had once been central to that vision. With a deep breath, he started the engine. He had made his choice 18 months ago. Now he had to live with it, and with the knowledge that Olivia was determined to live without him. The board meeting had been underway for 20 minutes, and Ethan had yet to focus on a single word. His mind kept drifting back to Olivia, to her refusal of his help, to the determined set of her jaw as she'd walked away from him. 2 weeks had passed since their encounter in Dorchester, and he had respected her wishes by keeping his distance. But Ethan, you need to be clear about your motivations here. Are you trying to help Olivia or ease your own conscience? The question struck closer to home than he cared to admit. Maybe both, he conceded. Does it matter if the outcome is positive? It matters to our marriage, Rebecca replied, her voice level but firm. I agreed to a practical partnership, Ethan, not to competing with a ghost from your past. Before he could respond, Rebecca gathered her files and stood. Think carefully about what you really want. I'll support the grant program because it makes business sense, but I won't be part of a charade. Her words followed Ethan throughout, the day echoing in his mind as he moved from meeting to meeting. Was he being honest with himself about his motives? And was he being fair to Rebecca, who had upheld her end of their arrangement with unwavering clarity and focus? That evening, Ethan found himself driving through Cambridge, past the small office building where Green Space Innovations had briefly existed. According to Peter's report, this had been the headquarters of Olivia's company before financial difficulties had forced its closure. The space now housed a tech startup, all traces of the previous tenant erased. On impulse, Ethan parked and entered the building. The security guard in the lobby barely glanced at him as he examined the directory. The 5th floor, once home to Green Space, now belonged to Neurotech Solutions. But the 4th floor still housed the same property management company that had leased to Olivia. 20 minutes and one persuasive conversation later, Ethan was reviewing the Green Space Innovations file with the building manager. The company had signed a 3-year lease, but had been forced to break it after only 9 months. The documentation included Olivia's original business plan, a comprehensive vision for urban sustainability projects targeted at lower-income communities. "She had some great ideas," the building manager commented as Ethan flipped through the pages. "Shame it didn't work out. Nice lady too, always paid on time until the end." "What happened at the end?" Ethan asked, though he already knew part of the story. "Family medical emergency, I heard. Then her partner got sick. Bad luck all." "Around?" The manager shook his head sympathetically. "We tried to work with her on the lease termination fees, but corporate policy, you know, not much flexibility." Ethan nodded, his attention caught by a section of the business plan outlining a micro-farm initiative for urban food deserts, a Shui concept remarkably similar to the successful Detroit project that Blackwood Harrison was now expanding. The similarities were too specific to be coincidental. This had been Olivia's idea, implemented without credit or compensation. The realization left a bitter taste in his mouth. How many other Blackwood Harrison innovations had originated in Olivia's mind? How much of their success was built on ideas she had never been acknowledged for? Later that week, Ethan presented the grant program proposal to Rebecca and the Foundation's executive director. The Blackwood Harrison Community Sustainability Initiative would provide funding, mentorship, and resources to small-scale environmental entrepreneurs focusing on urban communities. The selection process would be blind, applications would be evaluated based on merit, without names attached. "It's comprehensive," Rebecca acknowledged after reviewing the details. "The focus on underserved communities aligns well with our public image objectives. And the blind selection process prevents any accusations of favoritism." The executive director, Nancy Chen, nodded in agreement. "We've been looking to expand our community engagement beyond the traditional corporate philanthropy model. This could position Blackwood Harrison as a true partner in grassroots sustainability." "Then we're in agreement?" Ethan asked, trying to keep the eagerness from his voice. "One modification," Rebecca said, tapping a section of the proposal. "I want to be personally involved in the final selection committee." Ethan hesitated, uncertain of her motives. "The whole point of the blind process is to eliminate bias." "I understand that," Rebecca replied smoothly. "But as the face of the foundation, I should have direct involvement in our signature programs. It adds credibility." There was something in her tone that made Ethan suspect other motives, but he couldn't argue with her logic without raising questions. "Of course," he conceded. "We'll structure the committee accordingly." The program launched the following month with considerable media attention. Blackwood Harrison was praised for its innovative approach to supporting community-level sustainability efforts. Applications began arriving immediately, many from former Greenspace clients who had lost support when the company collapsed. Ethan didn't know if Olivia would apply. He hoped she would. The grants were substantial enough to relaunch her vision without any direct connection to him. The blind selection process would ensure fairness, regardless of Rebecca's involvement. 3 months into the program, as the first round of grant recipients was being finalized, Ethan received an unexpected call from Nancy Chen. "I think you should come to the foundation office," she said, her tone unusually serious. "There's a situation with the grant program that requires your attention." When Ethan arrived, he found Nancy and Rebecca in the conference room with a stack of files spread across the table. Rebecca's expression was unreadable as she gestured for him to join them. "We've identified our top candidates for the first round of grants," Nancy explained, handing him a summary sheet. 20 projects, all exceptional in different ways, but we've encountered a complication." Ethan scanned the list, his heart rate accelerating when he saw Project Cultivate ranked in the top 5. The brief description matched precisely the kind of work Olivia had been passionate about: urban micro-farms with integrated educational components for schools in low-income neighborhoods. "What's the complication?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral. Rebecca slid a file toward him. "When we removed the anonymity from the top candidates, we discovered that Project Cultivate was submitted by Olivia Reed." Ethan opened the file, finding himself looking at Olivia's application. The project overview was brilliant, innovative yet practical, addressing multiple community needs simultaneously. According to the evaluator's notes, it had scored among the highest in terms of feasibility, impact potential, and sustainability. Her proposal is excellent, Nancy said. But given the personal history involved, we wanted to consult with you before proceeding. Ethan looked up from the file to find Rebecca watching him intently. The selection process was blind, he pointed out. Her proposal earned its place. On merit. No one is disputing that, Rebecca replied. The question is whether awarding a grant to your former girlfriend creates an appearance of impropriety. Rejecting a worthy proposal because of a past relationship would be the true impropriety, Ethan countered. The whole point of the blind process was to ensure fairness. Nancy glanced between them, clearly sensing the tension. I should mention that Ms. Reed included a note with her application, stating that she was aware of the program's connection to Blackwood Harrison. She specified that if selected, she would accept the funding, but would decline any mentorship or networking components. That might involve direct interaction with either of you. The statement hit Ethan like a physical blow. Even now, Olivia was setting clear boundaries, refusing any personal connection while pursuing her professional goals. I see no reason to deny the grant, he said finally. Her proposal meets all the criteria, and she's taking steps to avoid any appearance of personal involvement. Rebecca studied him for a long moment before turning to Nancy. I agree. Proceed with all the selections as recommended by the committee. After Nancy left to prepare the notification letters, Rebecca remained seated, her expression contemplative. You didn't create this program just for her, she said, more statement than question. No, Ethan replied honestly. I created it because I recognize that our company has benefited from ideas similar to hers without providing proper support to the communities that inspired them. This program corrects that imbalance. Rebecca nodded slowly. I believe you, but I also believe there's more to this story than you've shared with me. Before Ethan could respond, she continued, I had a private investigator follow up on Ms. Reed's situation. Did you know she declined 3 job offers from our competitors after leaving Blackwood? Offers that would have provided financial stability during her partner's illness. Ethan stared at her, caught off guard by the revelation. No, I didn't know that. She also refused a settlement offered by Greenspace's primary investor, a settlement that would have resolved her debt issues. Rebecca's gaze was direct, challenging. Do you know why? No, Ethan admitted, though he was beginning to understand. Because all of those offers came with explicit or implicit conditions. Share your knowledge of Blackwood's internal strategy, provide insights into your projects, leverage your connection to Ethan Blackwood. Rebecca closed the file in front of her. She refused them all even when she desperately needed the money. That level of integrity is uncommon. Ethan sat in stunned silence, absorbing the implications. While he had been building his empire, with Rebecca, Olivia had been sacrificing everything, including opportunities that could have saved her company and possibly even her partner, to maintain her principles. Why are you telling me this? He finally asked. Rebecca's smile held a hint of sadness. Because I want you to understand what you walked away from, and because I think it's time we both acknowledged that our arrangement, while beneficial in many ways, lacks something essential. Rebecca? She held up a hand to stop him. I'm not being sentimental, Ethan, I'm being practical. A partnership built on shared ambition can be powerful, but it's not sustainable without trust and genuine respect. You've never fully committed to our marriage because you've never stopped measuring it against what you left behind. Her assessment was painfully accurate. In 18 months of marriage, Ethan had given Rebecca his name, his business acumen, and his public loyalty. But he had never given her his complete trust or opened himself to the possibility of deeper connection. What are you suggesting? He asked carefully. I'm suggesting we reevaluate our arrangement, Rebecca replied. Blackwood Harrison Enterprises is successful beyond our initial projections. The merger has achieved its business objectives, but on a personal level, neither of us is getting what we truly need. The conversation left Ethan shaken, questioning everything he had believed about his choices and their consequences. That night, unable to sleep, he found himself standing in front of the large windows of their penthouse apartment, looking out at the Boston skyline that represented his family's legacy. For generations, the Blackwoods had built their fortune by making calculated decisions, prioritizing strategic advantage over personal sentiment. Ethan had followed that tradition faithfully, believing it was the only path to preserving and expanding the family empire. But at what cost? The next morning, Ethan made a decision. He arranged for the foundation to host a reception for the first round of grant recipients, an opportunity to publicly recognize the innovators behind the selected projects. He knew Olivia would likely decline to attend, given her stipulation about avoiding personal interaction. But the invitation would be extended nonetheless, acknowledging her achievement alongside the other recipients. To his surprise, she accepted. The reception was held at the foundation's headquarters, a renovated historic building in downtown Boston. Ethan arrived early, greeting the other recipients and their families as they gathered in the main hall. Each project was featured in a display highlighting its unique contribution to community sustainability. When Olivia entered, the change in her was immediately apparent. Nearly 8 months pregnant now, she carried herself with quiet confidence, her simple blue dress elegant against her rounded form. There was a serenity in her expression that hadn't been there during their encounter in Dorchester, a woman who had faced her challenges and found her footing. She acknowledged Ethan with a polite nod before moving to examine the other project. Displays. He respected her distance, focusing on his duties as host while keeping aware of her presence across the room. It was Rebecca who approached Olivia first, a move that caught Ethan by surprise. From his position near the entrance, he watched as the two women engaged in conversation, their expressions serious but not hostile. After several minutes, Rebecca gestured toward a quieter corner of the room, and Olivia followed her, one hand resting protectively on her belly. Their discussion continued for nearly 20 minutes, too far away for Ethan to hear, but close enough to observe the intensity of their exchange. When they finally parted, Rebecca crossed the room to join him, her expression thoughtful. "What was that about?" Ethan asked quietly as she took a champagne flute from a passing server. "I offered her a job," Rebecca replied simply. Ethan stared at her in disbelief. "You did what?" "I offered Olivia Reed a position as Director of Community Sustainability Initiatives for the Foundation." Rebecca took a sip of champagne. "With complete autonomy over project selection and implementation, reporting directly to me, not you." "Why would you do that?" Rebecca's gaze was direct. "Because her talent is being wasted, because her vision aligns with what the foundation should be doing, and because it's the right thing to do." And she accepted. Ethan asked, finding it hard to believe Olivia would agree to work within the Blackwood-Harrison structure. "With conditions," Rebecca confirmed. "She wants a clear separation between her work and your oversight. She'll work from the Cambridge office, not headquarters, and she wants a written guarantee that her role won't be compromised by any personal complications that might arise." "Personal complications?" Rebecca gave him a measured look. "Olivia is expecting a child in approximately 6 weeks. A child that, according to my calculations and certain comments she made, might have been conceived shortly before your decision to pursue our arrangement." The implication hit Ethan with stunning force. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying that you need to have a conversation with Olivia," Rebecca interrupted. "An honest conversation about timing and possibilities and responsibilities, and then you need to decide what kind of man you want to be. Not what kind of businessman, but what kind of man." With that, she moved away to join a group of board members, leaving Ethan frozen in place, his world tilting on its axis. Could it be possible? The timing was tight. Olivia had to be at least 7 months pregnant now, and it had been approximately 18 months since their separation. But if the pregnancy had begun just before he'd received the ultimatum from the board, if she hadn't known until after he'd already made his choice. Across the room, Olivia was speaking with another grant recipient, her hands gesturing animatedly as she explained something about her project. The passion that had always defined her was still there, undimmed by the hardships she had endured. And perhaps his child was there too, growing beneath her heart, unaware of the complicated legacy awaiting it. As the evening drew to a close, Ethan knew he couldn't leave without speaking to her. He waited until most of the guests had departed before approaching, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Congratulations on the grant," he said simply. "Your project is exceptional." "Thank you," Olivia replied, her tone professional but not cold. "The funding will make a significant difference in getting it established." "Rebecca mentioned she offered you a position at the foundation," Olivia nodded. "It was unexpected, but the autonomy is appealing and the platform would allow me to implement ideas I've been developing for years." "She's smart that way," Ethan said with a rueful smile, recognizing talent and knowing how to position it effectively. A moment of awkward silence fell between them. Ethan gathered his courage, aware that the question he needed to ask might shatter the fragile civility they had established. "Olivia, don't," she interrupted, her voice low but firm. "Whatever you're about to ask, I'm not ready to discuss it tonight. This evening is about the grant program and the opportunities it creates for communities that need support. Let's keep it focused on that." Ethan nodded, respecting her boundary, even as questions burned in his mind. "Of course, I just want you to know that if you ever do want to talk about anything, I'm willing to listen." Something shifted in Olivia's expression, a subtle softening around the eyes, perhaps recognition of the sincerity in his offer. "I appreciate that," she said. "Maybe someday soon." It wasn't much, but it was a beginning, a small opening where before there had been only walls. As Olivia gathered her things to leave, Ethan didn't push for more. Some journeys couldn't be rushed, especially those involving trust that had been broken and wounds that ran deep. In the months that followed, Blackwood Harrison Enterprises continued its expansion, with Rebecca taking an increasingly prominent role in strategic decisions. The Foundation's Community Sustainability Initiative flourished under Olivia's direction, quickly becoming recognized as a model program for corporate engagement with grassroots environmental efforts. Ethan found himself in a period of personal reevaluation, examining the choices that had brought him to this point and the values that would guide him forward. The empire he had fought so hard to preserve and expand no longer seemed like the ultimate measure of success. There were other legacies worth building, other forms of wealth beyond financial portfolios and market share. When Olivia's child was born, a daughter with curious eyes and a determined spirit, Ethan received the news through Rebecca, who had developed an unexpected alliance with the new mother. The question of paternity remained unspoken, a conversation deferred until all parties were ready to address its implications. But in the quiet moments when the demands of business receded, Ethan found himself thinking about second chances and different kinds of strength. He thought about a woman who had refused to compromise her principles even when it cost her everything, and about the courage it took to rebuild from nothing. He thought about the true meaning of legacy, not buildings or bank accounts, but the impact of choices made with integrity and purpose. And in those moments, he began to understand that sometimes the most pragmatic decision isn't about strategic alliances or market positioning. Sometimes it's about recognizing what truly matters and having the courage to reach for it, even when the path forward is uncertain. The future remained unwritten, full of complicated conversations and difficult truths yet to be acknowledged. But for the first time since that fateful board meeting 18 months ago, Ethan Blackwood felt something he had almost forgotten. Hope. Not for business success or social status, but for the possibility of genuine connection and a life defined by more than pragmatic choices. The knowledge of her struggles continued to haunt him. "Ethan?" Rebecca's voice cut through his thoughts. All eyes at the table had turned to him, expectant. "I'm sorry," he said, straightening in his chair. "Could you repeat the question?" Rebecca's smile remained pleasant, but he recognized the irritation in her eyes. "Jason was asking your opinion on the Detroit expansion plans. The city council is offering additional tax incentives if we increase The scope of the urban farming project. Right. Ethan cleared his throat and focused on the documents in front of him. The original model has proven successful beyond our projections. The community engagement is higher than anticipated, and the productivity metrics are excellent. If the city is willing to support expansion, I believe we should move forward aggressively. Jason nodded, satisfied with the response. That's what I thought you'd say. I'll have the team draft a proposal for the next phase. The meeting continued, with Ethan making a concerted effort to remain engaged. When it concluded, Rebecca lingered behind as the other executives filed out. That's the third meeting this week where you've been mentally absent, she observed once they were alone. Whatever is going on, Ethan, you need to resolve it. The board is starting to notice. He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. I'm handling it. Are you? Rebecca set her tablet down and took a seat beside him. Because from where I'm standing, you're becoming increasingly distracted by a situation that should have been left in the past. It's not that simple. Never is, she agreed. But we built this partnership on the understanding that personal feelings wouldn't interfere with our objectives. The company needs your full attention right now. Ethan knew she was right. The Detroit expansion was just one of a dozen major projects currently under development. The Singapore deal was moving forward. Their renewable energy initiative in Colorado had just received federal approval. Blackwood Harrison was achieving everything they had envisioned. So why did it all suddenly feel hollow? I've been thinking about Olivia's situation, he said carefully. Rebecca's expression remained neutral. I thought she refused your offer of assistance. She did, but that doesn't mean we can't help indirectly. Ethan pulled up a document on his tablet and handed it to Rebecca. I've been researching community-based sustainability initiatives. The foundation could establish a grant program targeting small-scale urban projects led by local entrepreneurs. Rebecca scanned the document, her analytical mind quickly grasping the implications. And one of these entrepreneurs might happen to be Olivia Reed. Potentially. But the program would benefit dozens of innovators with limited access to traditional funding sources. It addresses a genuine gap in our sustainability strategy. She studied him for a moment. This is important to you. It wasn't a question, but Ethan answered anyway. Yes, it is. After a long pause, Rebecca nodded. Draw up a formal proposal. We'll present it to the foundation board next. The concession surprised him. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, she cautioned. I'm approving this because it makes strategic sense for our community outreach objectives. But TK, famed a historia. Dear listeners, we hope Ethan and Olivia's journey through ambition, loss, and rediscovery has resonated with you. For more emotionally rich stories exploring the complexities of human relationships and second chances, we've prepared a special playlist that dives into similar themes of redemption and personal growth. You can find it by clicking on the link to your left. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day we bring you unique narratives that explore life's most challenging decisions and the courage it takes to face their consequences. What do you think about Ethan's choices? What would you have done in his position? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section below. Your perspective adds depth to these stories and connects our community of storytellers and listeners. Stay tuned for our next emotional journey. We can't wait to share it with you.